Hi guys, I'm back with another Cryo-Shock Telestomp build update, and this time I've got some real treats for you. Last time I went through how to take this build to T15 plus maps, but the build still had a lot of issues with survivability. So I went back to the drawing board to try and figure out how to help defend against the many crowd control and one-shot mechanics that make the endgame difficult for this and a lot of other builds. In this video I'll cover the skill and passive updates, a new defense tech, and the updated build rotations. As always, be sure to check out the build planner in the description below, and if you have any questions on the build, please leave a comment on the video, catch me live 5 nights a week on Twitch and YouTube, or feel free to join the Discord where you can contact me directly. Let's get into it. So one question I've been getting a lot is whether Chaos Innoculation will work on this build. You'll all be pleased to know that the answer to this is a big resounding yes, and I've now incorporated this into the very late endgame variants of the build. What Chaos Innoculation does for us is to make us immune to chaos damage, but at the cost of making us only have one maximum life. This removes the need for chaos resistance, and it also makes us immune to bleeds and poisons, but it does mean we need to gain a life pool elsewhere, which is where Mind over Matter helps with converting our mana pool into our life pool. This also means that our mana regeneration becomes our life regeneration, another very important aspect of this build tech. So why have I left it so late to use, you ask? This is because I tried it when I had around 3,000 to 3,500 maximum mana, but I just found that I was dying a lot to the heavy one-shot mechanics, because my maximum health ceiling was just a bit too low without the use of any energy shield mechanics as an extra defense layer. Now that I have 4,000 plus mana and over 600 plus mana regeneration, I am finding it to be a much smoother gameplay experience overall. Chaos Innoculation helps remove some of the one-shot mechanics as well as hidden damage added into a lot of enemies' attacks in the endgame. What adding Chaos Innoculation enables us to do is to remove chaos resistance from all of our equipment in favour of elemental resistances. You can see here that I have stacked elemental resistances across my armours. Fire and lightning resistance on my helm, lightning resistance on my armour, fire resistance on my boots, cold and chaos resistance on my gloves, where the chaos could be replaced with another elemental resistance, fire resistance on my belt. There is still room to get more resistances here compared to what I have, but the focus is to try and solve it entirely in armor affixes to allow us to focus on other affixes elsewhere. One item that really benefits from this is our amulet. This is one of the only places you can get certain affixes on your gear, such as damage recouped as mana, all spell skills, and spirit. Anywhere you can get these affixes, you really want to try and get them, because they will boost your build in ways it can't be boosted in many other places. Here on my amulet, you can see that I have the double mana affixes, spirit, and I still have a cold resistance affix that could be replaced later on. Ideally, I would get all spell skills and damage taken recouped as mana, but I am still looking to get hold of these. What removing chaos resistance also allows us to do is to rethink how we use our item sockets. Instead of stacking elemental resistances in these, we can now consider using runes to scale our energy shield on the body armor, which allows us to stack more maximum mana through the Eldritch Battery key passive. It also allows us to consider using Soul Core or Zelatal socketables, which gives 2% increased maximum mana each, or even Soul Cores to increase our maximum resistances, improving our defenses against the heavy one-shot elemental attacks. There are plenty of options here, so it's down to your preference which way you would like to go with it. This next update is a new defense tech I've been working on, and I'm incredibly excited to bring it to you all as it's just incredibly strong. It's completely class agnostic, so it could be used in any build, on any class, and it's one of the only ways I've managed to find to bring flat damage reduction to all incoming damage from all enemy types. This was born because I was getting fed up of being too squishy as a sorceress in the endgame, so I was looking for ways to bring more defense without playing into energy shield, something we already know is on the nerf list for future updates. So how am I achieving this? I already had Blasphemy with the Enfeeble Curse socketed on the build before, but it was extremely weak for two reasons. It had a very small radius, and has a reduced effect. So I thought to myself, what if we could juice the size and effectiveness of the aura? This is where the new tech part comes in. So first of all, I should mention that the passive tree has changed a fair bit from the previous variant, and can only really be achieved once you have very good gear because it relies on you solving many other areas of the build without the need for passive nodes. Where we are now putting our focus is into scaling our curses, our shock potency, and taking as many dual sockets as we can whilst keeping the absolute essentials that this build requires, such as the key passives and VIP notables, such as Arcane Intensity. The first passive cluster we are taking to boost our Enfeeble aura is the Zone of Control cluster. This scales our curse size by 100% and also bakes in the Hinder debuff, so enemies are slowed by 15% when affected by one of our curses. This is extremely strong as it provides us a much more effective size of applying damage reduction to enemies around us, whilst also giving us some utility defense with slowing them down, helping against being overrun. The second passive cluster we're taking that is incredibly important to our curses is the Master of Hexes cluster. This in total with the small nodes gives us plus 36% effectiveness of curses. One thing to note about Blasphemy is that although it makes our curses automated as an aura, it does reduce their effectiveness, which at level 18 it makes our curses 42% less effective. What we are aiming to do here is to mitigate this reduction by boosting them back up again so that we can at least get back to 100% effectiveness, so we are benefiting as much as we can from the reduced damage this aura allows us. The third passive cluster we are now taking is the Reverberation cluster, allowing us to scale the size of all of our skills by a whopping 68%. This includes our curses and our lightning warp, so it's incredibly strong for this build, further increasing our damage reduction reach whilst increasing our telestomp size. So we've increased our aura size by 168%, and we've increased our aura effectiveness by 36%, but this still leaves us with a relatively small curse aura, and the effectiveness is still below 100%. So how do we boost this to a point where it is considered useful? This is where jewels come in, and my words, can these take a build to the next level? You can see here that I've currently got 6 jewel sockets at level 90, and I'll be aiming to try and get at least one more, if not 2, because what they allow us to do is to get stats more tailored to our build, at the cost of only 1 passive point. Jewel slots, if used wisely, can be more powerful than notables for a build, especially when focusing on certain aspects of gameplay. What we are using the jewels for in this build is to free up passive points by replacing any energy focus nodes with meta skills gain energy. By boosting our curses with increased area effects of curses and increased effect of curses, and by scaling our damage in a multiplicative way with increased magnitude of shock. The most important part here is the increased size and potency of curses. If you have 6 jewels and stack 20% plus size and 8% plus effectiveness everywhere, your Enfeeble curse now becomes screen wide, whilst applying a curse that is even more effective than it would have been before it had any reductions. The bigger the size of the curse, the better, as it will help reduce some of the spike damage that can occur from ranged attacks. To double up on this, once you have 178 plus spirits and a 20% quality blasphemy skill gem, you can look to socket hypothermia into blasphemy as well, since we have taken the Whispers of Doom key passive. This allows us to have 2 curses automatically being applied screen wide, 1 flat reducing enemies damage and 1 amplifying all of our damage by reducing their resistances to it. I can't state strong enough how much of an impact this tech has made to the build, and even though it still doesn't remove all of the one-shot mechanics, it feels a lot better to play than before. As for other skill and passive updates, there are only a couple of small updates since the last version of the build. Let's start with the skill updates. I have added mobility to Frostbolt, allowing faster movement whilst casting. I found this to be extremely useful when trying to deal with enemies surrounding you, as well as keeping up clearance speed on maps. Frostwall has been updated with a deep freeze support gem, so when we freeze bosses or larger enemies, they will stay frozen for 50% longer, allowing us longer to output our maximised damage without worrying about incoming damage. Lastly, I have added Ball Lightning as an additional manual cast skill, along with the Acceleration, Wind Wave and Unbreakable support gems. This allows us to start an engagement with Lightning Warp, without having to wait for Ball Lightnings to activate from the cast on freeze tech, whilst giving us some anti-stun protection if we get swamped by enemies. Acceleration makes the projectile move 40% faster, so we can use it to quickly engage harder to reach targets, or even use it to escape a fight quickly if things get tough. This brings an overall quality of life and fluidity to the build that was much needed. Now let's talk about the additional passive tree updates. The alternating current cluster is a very strong pick late game, because we are applying 2 shocks to enemies through the Ascension node Strike Twice, and this allows us to scale those shocks by an additional 50% potency, whilst gaining some extra mana regeneration in the process. To put that into context, that is an additional 10% multiplicative damage times 2. The other cluster we're taking is the overexposure cluster. This allows us to scale our exposure damage by 40%, which when doubled up with our Ascension node scaring winds is twice as effective. This gives us a lot of hidden damage, so it's an obvious pick in the Ultra endgame. There are various other small changes to the skills and passive tree, so if you want a full rundown of these, be sure to check out the planner in the description, as this covers it all in detail. In terms of general build rotation, I tend to use Frostball first, throw down Frostbolts so I can chill and freeze enemies, and then I'll manually throw over my Ball Lightnings, as you can see here. I use that because that allows me to either jump over my Frostball or engage on my own terms, and then once you start lightning warping in on the enemies, you're going to start generating so many Ball Lightnings for free anyway, you can just keep telestomping until you decide you need to disengage, or until you've killed all the enemies. One thing I will say, I wouldn't just YOLO teleport around all of the enemies all the time, because there are a couple of mechanics that no matter how defensive you go, they will just pretty much one-shot you. Some of those, and the ones that normally get me, are the periodic elemental explosions, lightning, fire, and cold. They'll either freeze you and make it so you get frozen until you die, or they'll just blow you up in one shot, and you won't even see them before you get there. If you start telestomping all around all these enemies all over the map, you'll just jump in on them and you'll get blown up. So what I tend to do is I tend to find out what I'm actually going to fight, block him off with Frostball, control the battlefield, freeze them with the Frostbolts, and then use your manual lightning bolt to just jump over and engage them on your terms. And if you feel a bit uncomfortable, just back off, block them off with Frostball, and repeat. And I tend to find that's the safest place to go with this build. Until those periodic elemental explosions and other one-shot mechanics get tuned down, which they may well do at some point because they're a bit over the top. That's probably the best way to go with any build that means you've got to get close to them. As for boss rotation, I'm on a level 80 map. I'm about to engage Gozen the Rebellious Rustlord. I'll start by throwing out Frostbolts to chill the ground. I'll hit him with all the Frostballs I've got and start using Eye of Winter to pick up the chilled ground to help freeze him as quickly as possible. Once he's frozen, I'll throw down my Comets immediately. The second those have hit, I'll back off and I'll start hitting with Eye of Winter as much as I can to do as much damage as I can. I did about 1 million DPS there. I didn't quite finish him off in one rotation, so I'll start placing down Frostbolts again. I'll apply any shocks I can through the auto-generated ones. The second he's nearly frozen, I will throw down Comets again. And once he's frozen, I'll aim to get him down to 5% life. And once he's on 5% life, I will jump on him and finish him with Lightning Warp. If you don't finish him in one rotation, then just repeat the cycle. Get him frozen, focus on him at that point, and that will you should finish him in 1 or 2 cycles in most cases. Okay guys, so that's where I've managed to get the build to since the last update. There's still plenty of work to be done here to push this even further, but I'm really happy with the build's progress. It's blasting high-end maps, and although it still has some survivability issues, it only really gets one shot by the extremely overtuned periodic elemental explosions, which will hopefully be addressed in a future patch. I reckon many builds will struggle with these. I also feel that this build is less likely to be nerfed than a lot of others right now, because it doesn't really make use of any exploits or extremely overpowered mechanics, so hopefully this build will survive the upcoming patches. If you want a more detailed rundown of the build and its various stages, be sure to check out the build planner along with the 2 build videos running up to this in the description below. If you have any further questions, remember to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, catch me live on Twitch and YouTube 5 nights a week, or feel free to join the Discord where you can contact me directly. Until next time guys, keep safe, much love.